Hello and welcome back to ClearCast, the real estate fintech podcast. As always, I'm Jeff Allen and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Kenon Chen. Kenon, how are you?
Hello, Jeff. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. This is episode 35.
Ooh, make it still a millennial, but it's prime home buying age. We know that. We
Yeah.
the cast is looking for a place to put down its roots.
Yeah, it's a place to put down its roots. And I think 35 is a good age. Like when I hit 35, that's like the start of my prime. And I've only improved every single year since.
Oh yeah?
Yeah,
What- Are we still on that path there, Jeff, this year?
we are. We
Okay.
are. I
Good.
have to say that every day I feel I'm getting better.
That's
Um, and mostly it's because I'm spending time with you, Keenan.
well, I appreciate that, but mostly I want to drink what you're drinking.
Okay. Well, I'm just having coffee, so it's what readily available to you. So we've got a great episode. We've got Chrissi Johnson, the CEO and founder of Alinement Advisors and former Minnesota resident, joining
Oh,
us later in this pod.
yeah.
But first, let's talk a little bit about news stuff. And we've got a theme in this episode, two themes that are interrelated. First theme is housing affordability.
Okay.
And the second is glass half full, glass half empty. Are you ready, Keenan?
I'm always ready for glass half empty.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I know you are a fan of sad 80s British post-rock.
I just saw Depeche Mode's going on tour.
Ooh,
I just saw the pre-sale for tickets. I mean,
are you gonna
gosh,
go?
I, I don't see how I can't.
I don't see how you can't either. It's right in your depressing wheelhouse. So let's talk glass half empty. News on affordability coming out of the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. They recently announced a 30 basis point reduction in the annual mortgage insurance premium that they're going to charge to borrowers. So net result kind of came at the White House direction. White House said that this cut will reduce housing costs by an average of $800 a year for roughly 850,000 home buyers and homeowners. So what's the glass half full here? What's the glass half empty?
I mean, glass half full. I think a lot of folks in the mortgage industry are applauding the decision. I mean, reducing costs for FHA borrowers is a good thing. I mean, anything that creates some more options for affordability is good progress. So, it's good they didn't raise them, right? So I think that part is glass half full.
Yep.
It's like we'll take what we can get. On the glass half empty side, though, obviously, $800 is we like the savings, but that's kind of a drop in the bucket when you look at the other factors at play for housing affordability right now. We're still seeing, we recently saw rates increase again, towards 7%, based on the strength of the jobs market and other indicators. It definitely seems like the Fed, might not back off as much as everyone would like to see on the next round of potential raises to the rate there. Seems like maybe even 50 basis points is maybe back on the table or not. I don't know. And then the other piece of it is home prices are not coming down and correcting in the way that maybe we thought they would. They're stubbornly staying high. In fact, this last month, we saw only a decline of negative 2.9% nationally, and the month before that we saw negative 3.2%. So we're actually seeing a slowing in the speed of home price decline. So that's all due to supply, right? There's just still not enough inventory on the market, especially existing homes. People are hanging on to those existing homes, hanging on to their sub 3%, mortgage loan, and not wanting to put the home back on the market. So all that leads to, like, that's a great step in the right direction that the FHA did, but from a housing affordability standpoint, there's other factors that are a lot more impactful.
So I felt that deserved a sad trombone sound, even though it didn't work and totally failed, because that was a very detailed and thorough description of the glass half empty. You gave like 1 second to the glass half full, and then like one lifetime to the
Skipped
glass
right
half.
over it. Skipped right over it.
Depeche Mode is deep in your blood, isn't it? All right, well, let's try the second one. We'll see if we can get a little more even balanced ratio. All right, second affordability story. This one is an update from the National Association of Realtors, our friends. We have presented at their conferences, and they're good people. They track something called the Housing Affordability Index, which is a really important metric because it takes into account a few different pieces of data every month to track a trend of how affordable is it to buy a house. And so what they're tracking is the prices of homes, the mortgage rates, and kind of how that turns into monthly payments, and then family incomes. So what are people earning? And by comparing those three legs of the stool, they can come up with this index of how affordable is housing. It's kind of a complicated number, but basically what you should know is the higher it is, the better it is from an affordability standpoint. And the lower the number is, the worse it is from an affordability standpoint. So let's start with the glass half empty. Because then we can maybe end on a positive note before our guest arrives.
Okay, all right.
That stink of 80s sad Depeche Mode off of this. Okay, so starting with the bad news. The affordability index in the most recent month they have, December, is 101.2. And to give you some perspective, that is 40% worse than it was in the same month in 2021.
Wow.
Yeah.
That wasn't bad. It's kind of scary you did that with your mouth.
Yeah. All of that is driven by the mortgage rate. So housing prices have pretty much been steady between these 2 points. The median family income in the US has gone up slightly from then to now, but mortgage rates have gone up by more than a full point compared to years. So that's the bad news.
Okay.
Let's talk about the good news. It has improved significantly from where it was in October. It was at 91.3, so it's gone up 10 points in the last 2 months. And that has been driven by housing prices going down very slightly from October to December, and mortgage rates going down from October to December. So, hey, that's good news, Kenon.
That's good. That is really good news. At least if you want to ignore the past 2 weeks. But yeah, that's great.
You just like what do you do on a sunny day? Do you just kind of say like, oh, this won't last, waiting for the clouds?
Well, it'd be nice if it rained. We do need.
You are only happy when it rains, Kenon, just like garbage.
Yes, that's a great song.
Shirley Manson, lead singer. Butch Vig on the drums.
I'm only happy when it... Okay, all right. I love it.
Well, I'm glad we were able to cover these important affordability topics with the same seriousness and level-headed approach that we bring to every pod episode.
True. I mean, really trained economists that we are. I mean, just fully certified in all of
Certified and licensed. We're licensed in our states for economics. Oh, one other quick affordability nugget. Do you know what the worst region of the country is for housing affordability?
Probably right where I live in
Yes, the Western United States. Do you know what the best region of the country is for housing affordability?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm gonna say the Midwest.
Represent Midwest. Wow, what a great region I live in. What a terrible region you live in.
Hey, hey Jeff, what's happening outside your window right now, weather-wise?
3 feet of snow. School is canceled, and I haven't seen my neighbors in 4 months. So yes, good point. Fair enough.
I'm just gonna leave it there. I'm just gonna leave that there.
Fair enough.
Awesome. Well, I am very excited to introduce our next guest, someone that I know well, and I get to actually interview and put in the hot seat, which is mainly what I'm excited about. But today we have with us Chrissi Johnson, who is the founder and CEO of Alinement Advisors. It's a New York-based advisory firm that coordinates housing policy efforts at the intersection of commerce and social change. Chrissi's 15 years of driving policy change uniquely positions her to identify opportunities for industry change. Chrissi, thanks for being on the pod.
Thank you, Kenon and Jeff. I'm excited to be here. I've been so eager to be on this podcast.
As
all you thought about.
It really is. I've been annoying Kenon day and night. So thank you guys for finally acquiescing to this.
I think the actual conversation was, is this still happening? Are you guys still doing this thing or what?
Just making sure.
So I mean, for our listeners, I mean, tell us a bit about yourself. And we're definitely interested in how you got started in this industry. What was your path to get involved in housing, especially?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. And I do know Kenon very well, and I'm sure he could tell you a lot about me, like besides my path, like my affinity for cheeky signs in my backgrounds or comfy pants, but there's probably a lot more that goes back to how we got here. So I do like to take it back because my passion is housing. And I am a firm believer that where you live matters. So I do think that where I grew up and how I grew up has affected what I'm doing today. So I actually grew up I'm based in Brooklyn, New York now, but I did grow up in a teeny tiny town of about 1,100 people. Most of you probably have more people than that in your social media followings, in Western Minnesota. And as you might imagine, Minnesota, I know, Jeff, you appreciate that. As you might imagine out there's not a whole lot to do. And so inspired by my girls, Carmen Sandiego, I hope you all know about Carmen, I really took it upon myself to really investigate and write about what was happening in my community, the issues that were both real and imagined at times, but especially when it came to issues that I thought of were concern about the people I cared about. So when I was 9, I wrote an investigative report entitled "Sniff to Get High and You Won't Be Around to Smell the Roses." About kids sniffing paint in my school district. It was submitted to a statewide journalism contest. I actually won. And this was really the start of my exposure beyond my teeny tiny community that I mentioned, and the impetus that pushed me into the next step, which was prioritizing college, moving on to grad school, where I actually studied counseling. And some of you may be surprised to learn about my next step, but those of you who know about politics aren't going to be surprised between the link between on the link between counseling and politics whatsoever. So I joined the Obama campaign in 2008. And once I started down that path, honestly, I was hooked. And I moved everything I owned in 2 suitcases to the District of Columbia, where I hustled my way through restaurants and volunteering. I managed to land some really incredible opportunities working in the Senate, working on a major Senate campaign, and then working at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. And the CFPB is where I discovered my love for consumers, specifically around their protections, their education and empowerment, and even more specifically about that initial thing I mentioned, which is where you live matters. So all of these platform issues that I'd been advocating for on all the political campaigns, such as healthcare, education, public safety, it's all packaged up in that bundle of privileges that comes with the community where you live. So working on that, the 2016 came, there was a big change in Washington. So I decided to ride that wave and scratch an itch. What I've been very transparent about admitting, but it was specifically the itch of, I'm kind of embarrassed that I may not know as much as I should know about the industry on which we are regulating, which was mortgages at the time. And so I decided no better place to learn than actually experiencing it firsthand. I started talking with a few different lenders and landed at Rocket Mortgage. At the time, it was Quicken Loans. So there I was able, they're the largest, they were the largest mortgage lender. I dug in, got to learn the ins and outs of how the business works, which I used to inform the company's position on a lot of policies that affected not only their internal business decisions, but also influenced and drove industry-wide change on policies around equity and access. And that's, from that, going from the CFPB to the industry, we call it, some people at the CFPB, some folks there may have considered that I entered enemy territory. But I discovered something very important, which was once we stopped talking past each other and really catastrophizing each other, we being the advocates and industry participants, and actually start listening and trying to address the root issues at hand, we agree a lot more than we realize and are far more powerful together. So I honestly thrived in the Rocket community. I loved it there. I loved the isms that they have. That's the culture that they have. All that innovation and energy was addicting and eventually became the inspiration for maybe one of the craziest things I've done yet, which is leaving my cushy corporate job a year ago. Literally, it's this week we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Alinement Advisors and starting my own company. So that's what I know what we're here to talk about today. So I really get to work with some really innovative companies in the housing space. I help them navigate the complexities of the consumer advocacy and regulatory space. And I work to find opportunities to continue to improve upon both their products and messaging while built through building the authentic relationships that can lead to successful partnerships that may either be in information sharing, feedback cycles, or like talking to each other and talking about each other. When you come to the table with your most authentic self, it's amazing what you can accomplish. And one of the ways I got to know Kenon and therefore Jeff actually was in my spare time while building a company, I'm also working on building a nonprofit, my side hustle called the Alilement Initiative. And that's where I'm working on something called the Salon, which I did at Rocket with the qualified mortgage rule. And I'm now doing with appraisals, which I know you're very interested in as well. So in those volunteer, what's that? You've never heard of it? What's the appraisal valuation? I don't know. We'll find out. But this is my dream, and we'll get into this. But the Alilement Initiative is I get to lead these, be a part of. I don't lead them. I'm honestly the least informed person in the room most of the time. But I get to facilitate the conversations on these solutions. This time on appraisal bias through these coalitions, these collaboratives that are the Salon. It's been a real honor. I just was speaking about this actually with Women in Housing and Finance on a panel literally 30 minutes ago, but with women who are part of WHF and are also part of the Salon. And it's a magical experience because right now what you see are people coming together in their volunteer hours. They choose to do this. Kenon chooses to join that call every week and come with his full self because we all truly believe in the importance of this reform and this change in an issue that affects all of us, really. So there's my passion. That's why I'm doing it. As you can tell, I don't care at all. I don't get excited. So I'm really pumped for this to be a boring conversation.
Well, thank you for that overview of your entire journey. What you got to today. The Minnesota part's probably my favorite part,
I know
but
it will be.
no, but so obviously a lot of experience with huge entities on both sides of the aisle. You know, you've got regulator and the industry side, but the common through line there is, I mean, CFPB is about as big of a regulator as there is, and Rocket's the biggest lender you can imagine, just huge organizations. And to kind of leave that and kind of strike out on your own is a big shift. So what's that been like, you know, leaving these huge entities and striking out on your own?
Yeah, it is. It's currently a woman show. So, for anyone who's done it, you know, and anyone who hasn't, it's not a warning, but an invitation. It is humbling, in the best way possible. I have never been so damn terrified and excited all at once. It's really, I've also never, if I hadn't have done this, I would have never known what I'm capable of. I think like a lot of women in our industry, I've grown up with a weird imposter syndrome of walking in a room and having to really bolster myself in these moments where I am alone at times. I find out how not alone I am, as ironic as that may sound. When I was at Rocket in the CFPB, I really had the privilege of having institutional resources, for example. So things like administrative and operational support. I had executive assistants helping with scheduling. I didn't even know what happened with my payroll and what happened and the taxes and all of that stuff. And when you're on your own, you don't just, I mean, it's really fabulous to be like, I'm a CEO, but you're the CEO, you're the COO, you're the CFO, you're your executive assistant, your marketing associate, you are your own intern. It's not always, you know, glamorous and all that, but it teaches you, I think, when you have that rug pulled out from under you of those institutional resources, you have the opportunity of, instead of falling through and hitting rock bottom, that can be your launching pad. And I really, like I said, once I had that crutch removed, found that diverse plethora of resources around me. The world is really my resource, and there are so many people out there too, like Kenon and Jeff yourselves, who like to point in the right direction and help when we need it. So I think my biggest thing is really figuring out exactly what I was capable of, building up the confidence to get over some of that imposter syndrome. And then once I realized that I belong in the room and I get to be humbled by the people I'm surrounded with, and not the smartest person in the room, like I said, not the one with the answers, you really figure out what the difference you can make.
Yeah, I mean, super inspiring. I think, you know, the journey you've been on and the fact that you are bringing people together, that's, you know, it's amazing. I mean, it's inspiring, I think, to a lot of people. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, what gets you passionate and excited, which is like this idea of equitable housing policy. You know, what I guess maybe in a couple, with maybe a couple examples, like what does that mean to you? I mean, that's a buzzword that's kind of going around quite a bit now, the idea of, you know, equitable or equity, and affordability. Like we hear these terms, but like, what does that actually mean to you? And what are some of those kind of key issues that represent driving that forward for you?
I think equity to me means having the opportunity to be a participant in the system that was currently, unfortunately, built for some, but not for everyone. And equity is the thing that is going to bridge that change, push that wave that needs to happen. When I point to like the system was built for some but not everyone, we're still hemorrhaging from the historic effects of redlining, where, you know, it was literally illegal to lend do people of Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian American heritage in white neighborhoods, and the law drew red lines around those communities. And that's not like, we're not talking about, that was centuries ago. This was it was still happening within the last 50 years. And in some communities today is still built into their law. So that's not just the past. And that has held back a lot of people in acquiring the generational wealth that communities, white communities specifically, have been able to build over time, because home ownership is still unequivocally the best way to build wealth in the country. And if you don't get to access that generational wealth, like if you're from a community of color and you don't get to access generational wealth that people from white communities have been able to access for generations, that affects other parts of your life. It affects your ability to build credit. It affects student education. I mean, education is the way to build a leg up in this society. It still is. Like, you build wealth through home ownership, through education, you get to build your way up. It's a mobility factor. And if you can't pay for that education, you're put into other, for-profit institutions that may not be able to give you the education that is considered valid in some places. So I really just think that equity, like I said, it comes down to where you live matters. And our democracy was built in a way that honors how you are actively participating in your community and can point to an address as your home. And it drives a lot of the policies that I do, appraisals being a prime example. Equity right there, when you have communities that have been historically undervalued, and when you take comp that's based on a comp throughout history, it's going to be hard to compare one home in one community to the same exact home in another community and say they're the same, because it just hasn't been historically. So how are we looking at it? It's a bifurcated problem with multiple layers within that bifurcation of looking at the historic issues around appraisals, which I think a lot of that work needs to come in investments in those communities, helping to build people up to help reinstate equity that they've lost and had pulled away from them over the years, and also looking at the current system today. So where are the opportunities to dial back in some of that subjectivity, or that can result in bias in the appraisal process? And people talk, there is racial bias, but there's also just human bias, where you bias occurs when you have a preconceived notion about how something's supposed to be. I think that in the summer, the sky is supposed to be blue. And if it's gray, I just disagree. That is not supposed to happen. And that seems very, very like basic pedestrian, but the point is bias exists. We all have bias. And until we acknowledge that in the systems that we have in place and find opportunities to dial back that bias and improve it with data, while still being aware of the fact that data and automation can at times recycle bias, as long as we're intentional about that and build upon that, I think there's a real great opportunity to move forward, use data to build equity and bring us to the level playing field that we need.
Yeah. Apparently earlier, I found out that I have a bias towards glass half empty versus glass is half full. So I don't.
Do you want to admit that?
I mean, Jeff kind of brought it out of me. I don't know. It's something
I'm
about
forcing him to admit it.
He triggers that in me. So.
Are you an Eeyore? Oh my gosh, Kenon's an Eeyore. That's a new one for me.
He listens to depressing 80s British music, so it's kind of just, it's in his DNA.
Gosh.
So let's dig in a little bit more on appraisal, a subject near and dear to our hearts. I know you've got this very unique appraisal salon working group that Kenon is a participant in. Would love to just hear a little bit more about what issues are you guys digging into there? Where do you see the most opportunity to improve the appraisal space, and how's that group going to push towards active change?
Of course. So we've had some really great work, and I actually don't want to mess this up. So I'm actively pulling up the list of working groups that we have within the appraisal salon. We started in April. What is it? It's 2023 now. So April of 2022. So almost a year ago, we started the salon. And it started as a group really focused on finding alignment, for the company name, around the issues, the complicated issues within appraisals. So that included, obviously, I mentioned the elimination of bias. It included making sure that we have more consistency, quality, but I'll actually read out the mission statement itself. So we're a volunteer collaboration. It's a collaboration of the nation's largest mortgage lenders, appraisal professionals, consumer advocacy, civil rights organizations, and leading industry trade and real estate groups. So we came to discuss together to figure out a way that looks at a home appraisal reform that will enable accurate valuation of properties, that can serve for the collateral of home loans, and in doing so, support the American economy and permit consumers to achieve the full benefits of home ownership. That is a very fancy way of saying the system needs a lot of work. We broke it down into 7 different working groups within it since sending out a few different documents, including governance and structure, feedback to FHA, technology and innovation, which Kenon is definitely a part of, ROVs and having a true and fair assessment, appraisal data, appraisal report, and of course, AMCs. I would say probably the biggest themes jumping out that have had the most interaction on the salon, and Kenon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they've been around governance and structure, technology and innovation, data, and then the ROVs and true and fair assessment. And we're finding that a lot of those themes fall into each other. So as we're looking at governance and structure and the current construct that exists, where it is honestly a private entity, the Appraisal Foundation, that is charged honestly with the task of making the rules, there is a need for more clarity about how that is done. Additionally, not only is it the Appraisal Foundation, but to give you a little bit more insight into how actually fragmented it is, the oversight of the appraisal industry is scattered across 13 federal agencies, 1 private nonprofit, that's the Appraisal Foundation, and 50 states and territories. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done for consistency. When we talk about consistency, though, we lead into the working group of data. And so if we don't have data, it's really hard to make decisions around what a regulation might look like, a governance structure might look like, a regulatory body for the appraisal industry, if we don't have consistency and understanding the quality of how these appraisals are done and who is doing them in what ways. That data does exist. It just hasn't been released in a non-aggregate form that allows us to inform our decisions as we engage with appraisers moving forward. And wrapped up in all of that with the data, the governance, there's also the technology and innovation, because data leads to automation, right? Like the better your data, the better your opportunity to automate. And automation and innovation can be a double-edged sword. It can solve a lot of problems by removing some level of bias, making it more consistent. The more data you put in there, the more consistent it gets, the more accurate it gets. And especially when we look at areas like rural areas where it's hard to get an appraiser out there, where does it help reach those areas when you can't send someone there? That being said, you can't talk about automation without talking about the way that automation has the potential to recycle historic bias. So how do we ensure that as we're building out automation, we're having these conversations to check for those unintended consequences that redlining would have created, like I said, recycling that bias, that nobody wants to be doing that here. And then the final one, I think, is making sure that we're thinking about the training and certification that comes into what it means to be an appraiser. That's an ongoing conversation that we have as well with the salon. So right now that is currently under the Appraisal Foundation. There is a lot of opportunity to think about what mentorships look like. How do we ensure that fair housing training's in there? How do we make it less difficult to be a doctor than an appraiser to ensure that we are bringing in more people, more diverse people into an industry that unfortunately people are retiring, and we're finding, and it's getting, the troops are getting thinner and thinner. So they're unable, like I mentioned, to go to those rural areas. They're less readily available. So with the combination of technology and appraisers, how do we bridge that moving forward? So I think those are probably the biggest themes that we've been discussing within the salon. But I mention this all the time, and this is not the first time that Kenon's heard it, but it's a big stinky onion.
Yeah.
And every time you pull back a layer, it gets stinkier. And so how do we work together to find the moments for alignment so that it becomes more powerful when presenting to decision makers and lawmakers when trying to solve the problem?
Yeah, I enjoy the fact that it's, there's a lot of people represented from all people that wouldn't normally be in a room talking to each other from these different groups, have this opportunity to find consensus alignment, but also like be really solution focused, not just talking about the problems, but also, really focused on the solution. So, 2023, you're entering into your second year. Kind of one final question here, which is, where do you see yourself headed, this year, with alignment and the exciting things, even on the consulting side, what are you excited to tackle this next year?
Yeah, 2023 is our year, y'all. I'm so excited. It is a magic number. I believe in it. When I came up with the name Alignment, a little background, I was doing yoga and finding my alignment, truly. So something that I've been dedicating a lot to in yoga is in similar theme is the balance of expansion and focus. So how are we going to expand the work that Alignment is doing while staying focused on the problems at hand? Because it can get really difficult at times to not get caught up in this really big problem, the stinky onion, and spiral down several rabbit holes and then suddenly feel very flustered because you're like, I can't do it all. But so how do we continue to grow and spread the goodwill of Alignment, finding that collaboration while staying focused? As I continue to grow with the consulting company, I have had the privilege of working with companies who share that vision with me, and I get to be choosy. And so that's where I think the focus is really zeroing in on there, is that with the Alilement Advisors consultancy, the companies that I align with, we believe in equity. We believe in innovation and new solutions to old problems that keep the consumer first and foremost at it. That balance, like you said, commerce and social change, really at that intersection there, that we don't believe that doing good and doing well have to be mutually exclusive. So that focus has been my privilege. The expansion this year that I'm hyper excited about is around the Alignment Initiative, which is a nonprofit. And that's where the salon is going to fall under. And it's also where we're going to be bringing in a lot of those seed and pre-seed innovators who are the ones coming up with the solutions, but maybe don't have the resources or the mentorship relationships to be like, we're building this out and we agree that we can do good and do well and we want to do the right thing, but help us avoid those unintended consequences. So really thinking about that flywheel, that we have been banging our heads against a wall with the same old solutions to the same old problems for so long. Is it time to say, you know what, guys, let's bring in some new stuff, but make sure we do it well. Elevate the conscience into the action and making so that we don't harm people and actually can change the market and consumers' lives for good. So that's the expansion side of growth. Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Well, having you on as a guest has been a privilege of mine, and so excited to see what you're doing. Kudos to you. 1 year in, I mean, that's a huge milestone to be 1 year in your own business, and looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Kenon. I love Clear Capital, and so always happy to have you in the salon, in fellowship. You guys are doing great things.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chrissi.